Have you ever had a moment that made your skin crawl? A shadow where there shouldn't be one? A whisper in an empty room, or something you simply can't explain? If so, we want to hear from you. Here at the Haunted UK podcast, we're always on the lookout for spine-tingling stories to feature in our end-of-season listener episodes and our short haunt series. Whether it's a chilling encounter, a mysterious experience, or something that's haunted you for years, we want your tale. Send your story to contact us at hauntedukpodcast.com. And don't forget to follow us on social media: Facebook, X at Haunted UK Pod, TikTok and Instagram at Haunted UK Podcast, or visit our website www.hauntedukpodcast.com. Now, if you love what we do and want even more haunted goodies, then you can support the show on Patreon and Ko-fi. We've got 2 brilliant tiers, Possessed and Spooked, both packed with bonus content, exclusive episodes, and extra material that'll keep you up all night. But that's not all. We've launched a brand new sister podcast, Haunted UK Fiction, and we're calling all storytellers. Whether you're a published author, an aspiring writer, or someone with a natural gift for spinning eerie tales, we're looking for original fictional short stories and novellas with strong paranormal or supernatural themes. Think suspenseful, mysterious, atmospheric, terrifying, thought-provoking, even darkly magical. If your story is selected, we'll professionally narrate, record, mix and master it into an audiobook-style format, then feature it on the show. You'll get a copy of the finished production to use however you like, and you'll retain full ownership of your work. Submit your story to hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com and follow us on Instagram at hauntedukfiction. So whether it's truth or fiction, if it's haunted, we want it. Now, sit back and enjoy the episode. Early settlers in what would become the Canadian province of Quebec were known for being hardy, resourceful, proud people, having to survive both the harsh climate of the region and the persistent threat of assimilation, which could potentially lead to the loss of their culture, traditions, and history. Over the course of centuries, their stories were passed down to both record this rich cultural history and to warn the population of the various dangers of the land. From the ghost of a caged witch, a unique take of the werewolf and deals with the devil, to the many ghosts left behind by the challenges of settling a new frontier, the stories are as varied as they are numerous. So join us for Ghostly Tales and Legends of Quebec, Part 2. Arguably, the most famous tale in Quebecois folklore has its roots in very real, twisted, shocking and tragic events. Marie-Josephte Corriveau, later dubbed La Corriveau after her execution in 1763, is synonymous with tales of witchcraft and hauntings in French-Canadian folklore. Stories of La Corriveau terrorizing visitors to the area of Old Quebec where her body was hanged in a metal cage have been told for centuries and persist to this day in the minds of many Quebecers. The discovery of her cage in 1851 at a local church cemetery revived people's imaginations and inspired stories that appeared in several print books, both as novels and as part of short story collections at the time. Since then, the character of Corriveau has appeared in songs, films, theatre productions, and artworks such as sculptures and paintings. In the oral storytelling tradition of Quebec, Corriveau has been depicted as a murderous witch who killed up to 7 husbands. In more modern times, starting in the 1960s and 70s, with both the feminist movement and the Quebec nationalist movement, Marie-Josephte Corriveau became both a symbol of English oppression and a victim of a patriarchal society. Born in 1733, Marie-Josephte had 10 siblings, all of whom died at a young age. She married a man named Charles Bouchat at 16 years old and had 3 children before becoming a widow 11 years later. Just over 1 year after Charles's death, she remarried. Her second husband, Etienne Dudier, was found dead in his barn a year and a half later with extensive injuries to the head. Initially, it was concluded the injuries he sustained were from a horse's hooves, but suspicion and rumours of homicide quickly spread through town, due in part to M. Dudier being at odds with both Marie-Josephte and his father-in-law. At this point in history, Quebec was known as New France and had recently fallen under British rule. Upon hearing the rumours, the British military, who was in charge of maintaining order, opened an investigation into Dudier's death. At the conclusion of this investigation, Marie-Josephte and her father Joseph are arrested. They are brought before a military tribunal composed of 12 English officers and presided over by Lieutenant Colonel Roger Morris. The court finds Joseph Corriveau guilty of murder and condemns him to death, while Marie-Josephte is found guilty of being an accomplice and condemned to 60 lashes and having the letter M branded onto her hand. On the eve of his execution, Marie-Josephte's father allegedly confesses to a priest that he was only an accomplice to the murder and that his daughter was the actual perpetrator. Marie-Josephte is brought back to court where she confesses to killing her husband with an axe while he was sleeping due to his poor treatment of her and his abusive ways. The court finds her guilty of murder and not only condemns her to death, but specifies that after her execution, her body should hang in chains. This was the actual verbiage used at the time. This punishment was new to the inhabitants of New France, as it did not exist while the area was still under French rule. Joseph, Marie's father, was retried, found not guilty, and released. Marie-Josephte Corriveau was executed on the grounds where the Quebec Parliament now stands, near the Plains of Abraham, the battlefield where the French lost to the British. Her body was placed in a metal cage and put on public exhibit for 5 weeks, after which a British commander gave the order for her body to be taken down and buried wherever they see fit, was the quote. Marie-Josephte was one of the first people in New France to have their body exhibited in a metal cage. This lit the imaginations of the population, which in turn spun legends that have lived on ever since in Quebec's oral storytelling tradition. The trouble with oral storytelling, though, is that it turns into a game of telephone. Over the years, Corriveau's body count went from 1 husband to 7, and her character went from being a simple murderess to an evil witch with supernatural powers. The discovery of the cage that had contained her body in a local cemetery in 1851 sparked newfound interest in her story and reactivated the legends and lore surrounding it. Authors created fictionalized accounts of a supernatural Corriveau hanging in her cage, terrorizing passers-by as she pleads with them to take her to a witch's den on the neighboring island of Orleans. She was also depicted as having a deep knowledge of poisons and was rumoured to be a direct descendant of Catherine de Hay, better known as La Voisine, an infamous serial killer in France in the mid-1600s. It was rumoured that Corriveau had also killed her first husband by pouring molten lead into his ear while he slept. She was said to have been a very jealous woman and found her husband to be too much of a libertine, so she doled out her punishment. She was depicted as a psychopath and said to be without feeling or remorse when first her father was prepared to take the fall for the murder of her second husband, and eventually when she herself was found guilty of his murder. As the legend goes, Le Corriveau, from the very first night her body was put on exhibit, would leave her cage and follow passers-by. Other iterations suggest she would visit a nearby cemetery to feast on freshly buried bodies. It was also rumoured that anyone who passed by her cage and stopped to gawk would then be cursed with either accidents, psychotic breakdowns, or death. Accounts from local inhabitants tell stories of hearing a woman screaming, as if being tortured, along with the terrible, macabre sound of iron creaking, even long after the cage had been taken down and buried. Upon its rediscovery in 1851, Le Corriveau's cage was exhibited in Montreal, Quebec City, and even on Broadway in New York City, where it was purchased by none other than P.T. Barnum. Damaged in a fire at Barnum's American Museum, the cage made its way to the Boston Art Museum via an associate of Barnum's named Moses Kimball. Upon Kimball's death in 1899, the cage was donated to a museum in Salem, Massachusetts. It wasn't until 2013 that the cage was rediscovered and finally returned home to Quebec, where it was acquired by the Quebec Museum of Civilization. It is still stored there today in a controlled environment to prevent its decay and is occasionally put on display for the public. Perhaps, in those times, Le Corriveau, once again put on public exhibit, comes out of hiding to follow an unsuspecting visitor who has lingered and stared just a little too long for her liking. Another popular figure of Quebecois lore is the Loup-Garou, the Quebecois version of the werewolf. The legend was brought to New France with Norman settlers and features a human that transforms into a terrifying, powerful creature at night. Unlike more traditional werewolf myths, the French-Canadian version of the creature retains its human consciousness and intelligence, making it a particularly fearsome monster. According to legend, the curse would be placed on a person who had failed to fulfill their religious duties, such as attending Mass, particularly on religious holidays such as Easter or Christmas. Other versions of the tale say the transformation would occur in people who had made a pact with the devil or through some form of witchcraft. There are different variations of the story, but most say the curse was finite, typically lasting 100 days. The curse could be broken early if blood was drawn from the creature, but the person who drew the blood would then have to endure the curse themselves for 100 days. One of the most famous stories about the Loup-Garou is that of Jean Plante and his brother Thomas. According to the story, Jean lived and operated a windmill on an island near Quebec City. One day, a beggar approached Jean, who had been drinking all day, and asked for charity in the name of God. Jean dismissed the man and turned his back on him. The man, seeing Jean's brother approaching, once again begged for alms, but was turned away. The beggar laid his hand on the mill, then turned and vanished. Within moments, the mill stopped working. A thorough inspection of the mill found no issues and no explanation as to why it had stopped. Jean, in a drunken stupor, blamed his brother Thomas for the breakdown, and an altercation ensued. Thomas tried to convince Jean that it was the beggar who had placed a curse on the mill, but Jean didn't believe such things and dismissed his brother the same way as he had dismissed the beggar. His mill out of order, Jean decided to spend the rest of the day drinking, figuring the problem could wait to be resolved the next day. He fell asleep on the ground outside his mill and was woken in the night by a series of Feu Follet, known as will-o'-the-wisp in the UK, dancing around the exterior of the mill. A growl in the nearby brush caught Jean's attention. Squinting, he was able to make out a large, red-haired dog through the trees staring at him, with eyes dark as coal. Jean, paralyzed with fear, remained on the ground until dawn. In the cold light of day, he brushed aside his fears and dismissed them as a side effect of alcohol and being overtired. He spent the following days trying to get his mill working again, but to no avail. The nights were mostly sleepless as he found himself waking to the sound of growling and scratching outside his mill, as the lights from the Feu Follet danced around outside his window. By the 8th day, Jean was becoming worn out from lack of sleep. He hadn't been to Mass all week, choosing instead to spend his time drinking and working on his mill. He drank well into the night, and at midnight, as his clock chimed the 12th tone, the door to the mill was blown open by a sharp gust of wind. In the doorway stood the red-haired dog he had seen the first night. The pair remained at a standoff, staring at one another, Jean in disbelief and the dog in a calm but threatening posture. Time froze for several minutes when a gust of wind broke the spell by blowing out the candle Jean had set on the table. He reached for the matches he knew were nearby, but couldn't find them. Jean got out of his chair and instinctively began to back away from the door. In the faint light coming in from outside, he saw the dog slowly stepping into the room, its cold, dark eyes fixed on him. Jean, terrorized, felt around for something with which to defend himself. His hand gripped a scythe he had hanging on the wall, and he swung it toward the beast, striking its head. Upon impact, the mill immediately roared back to life, filling the room with its thundering, grinding sound. Jean blinked as a soft glow came from the center of the room. He rubbed his eyes in shock at the scene before him. There stood his brother Thomas with a lit match in his fingers, blood dripping from his right ear. "What happened to your ear?" whispered Jean, confused. "You know what happened," replied Thomas, his voice harsh. Thomas bent down to pick up a piece of a dog's ear from the ground, blood still dripping from it. Jean stared at his brother in disbelief. "It was you," he cried as he collapsed to the ground, maniacal laughter escaping from his throat. It is said that Jean never recovered from his rapid descent into madness after the events of that night. If the legend is to be believed, after having spilled blood from the beast, Jean himself would have had to endure the curse for 100 days. The only thing more terrifying than the Loup-Garou is one that has spiraled into the depths of an unsound mind. Some scholars who have studied the myth of the Loup-Garou have made associations with Native American folklore, specifically the Wendigo, a creature that, in indigenous tales, is said to have once been human before being turned into a cannibalistic monster. Indigenous tribes are known for their oral storytelling traditions, and the tale of the Wendigo predates the arrival of European settlers to America, but the first mention of the Wendigo dates from 1636. It was written by a French missionary living among the Algonquin people in what was to become the province of Quebec. The missionary described a warning given to him by a native woman who told him a fearsome creature of local legend had eaten some of the tribe members overnight, leaving the rest to survive only because the beast was called elsewhere. The Wendigo is thought to be symbolic, used as a warning about the dangers of being greedy and selfish in a time when community cooperation was essential to survive. As the legend is told, a greedy person prone to cannibalism transforms into a monstrous, emaciated creature up to 15 feet tall that stalks and eats humans. It has glowing sunken eyes, sharp yellow teeth, and formidable claws. Horrifically, in some versions of the tale, the creature's lips are chewed or entirely missing, having been eaten by the creature itself. There are variations in the description of the beast depending on which indigenous tribe is telling the tale. Some paint it as hairless, while others describe it as having fur. It may have pointed ears, horns, or antlers. The common thread seems to be the putrid scent of rotting flesh that follows it, typically the first indication to the unsuspecting human that they may shortly be made into a meal. The Wendigo is said to have heightened senses and exceptional strength, giving its victims little chance of survival once it sets its sights on them. The creature prefers colder climates to the woodlands of Canada, having an ease of movement through the deep forest, snow and ice. Few people have the ability to subdue and destroy a Wendigo, a task usually taken on by the tribe's shaman or healer, who would use a weapon made of silver, steel or iron to take the creature out. In some versions of the legend, the Wendigo is not destroyed until its heart has been cut out and burned in a roaring fire. In some instances, the Wendigo is described as a spirit capable of possessing humans rather than a real-life creature. The spirit enters a person's consciousness through a dream, causing the person to become violent and deranged, sometimes exhibiting a tendency toward cannibalism. The spirit is said to be particularly attracted to people who have negative traits, such as greed or gluttony. Speaking of strange things in the forest, Feu Follet, mentioned earlier in this episode, is a sudden manifestation of light that has the appearance of a small flame. These flames have a long history of being seen and in New France were typically viewed as bad or sad spirits haunting forests, swamps and cemeteries. They are a big part of Quebecois folklore, as much due to the origin of these spirits as the way one would get rid of them. This phenomena also has roots in other cultures, known in England as will-o'-the-wisp, Feu Follet in Louisiana, and spooky lights or ghost lights in other parts of the United States. Feu Follet typically appear as a pale glow, often blue, but sometimes yellow or light green, in the shape of a small flame floating in the air just above the ground or water. They generally shine only briefly, a matter of seconds, with those lasting minutes being an exceptional occurrence. They do not produce smoke, nor do they inflame surrounding objects or light grasses or other flammable things they come into contact with. Legend going back to France has it that Feu Follet are the troubled souls of people in purgatory, children who have died before being baptized, or evil spirits looking to drag unsuspecting travelers deep into the swamps or forests. But the phenomenon has not only been witnessed in several countries, its meaning changes slightly with each one. In England, will-o'-the-wisp are thought to be the spirits of young boys carrying lanterns, which has spurred the term jack-o'-lantern. They are also said to take unsuspecting travellers to the depths of nearby swamps and forests, never to be seen again. In Wales, the flames are seen as spirits returning to Earth to collect a relative on the verge of death, and the size of the flame corresponds to the size of the dying person. If the flame is small, it predicts the death of a child. In Scandinavia, it is believed that Feu Follet mark the place where treasure has been buried both on land and underwater, and this treasure can only be found if it is dug up while the flame is apparent. As the legends go, there are several methods to protect oneself from Feu Follet. One is to plant a sewing needle into the ground to force the flame to pass through the eye of the needle, giving one time to escape while the Feu Follet is busy doing so. Throwing a rock into water where Feu Follet are shining also supposedly makes them scatter away. Today, this rare phenomena is often romanticized as guardians of the graves, small flames found in cemeteries watching over lost loved ones through the decades. However, there is a plausible explanation for it, and why it has become rarer over time. Because Feu Follet are often observed near swamps and in damp cemeteries, one scientific explanation focuses on anaerobic bacteria as being the cause, and that modern burial methods are the regression of humid zones and forest flooding have made the conditions for the phenomena less frequent. Given a history that has seen centuries of conflict, it's no surprise Quebec boasts several haunted locations. One of these is the Horse Palace, located in the popular Montreal neighbourhood of Griffintown, which was once an industrial area that housed both factories and their primarily Irish immigrant workers who had come to Canada to escape the famine. The Horse Palace was originally a stable built in the 1800s to house the horses that pulled Montreal's many trams and carriages. However, by the 1950s, with the slowdown of the industrial sector, the area's buildings became vacant and fell into disrepair. Now a bustling, popular neighbourhood, the echoes of Griffintown's past remain. Visitors to the Horse Palace claim to hear disembodied voices and other strange sounds with no logical source. Some witnesses report encounters with shadowy figures said to be the remnants of the immigrants who were often overworked in the area's factories. There is a general sense of unease at the Horse Palace that is hard to ignore, in a sense ensuring that those who came before are not forgotten. It's easy to brush off tales of haunted cemeteries because of their eerie atmosphere being so conducive to priming the imagination, but Mount Royal Cemetery, the largest cemetery in Montreal, has pushed past those doubts with its very real reputation of being haunted. Situated atop Mount Royal, a large hill at the centre of the city, the cemetery grounds are stunning with miniature trees and endless rows of ornate gravestones. But beneath its serene and peaceful appearance lies a long history of ghosts and lore. One of its most famous ghosts is that of Simon McTavish, who, in his living years, made his fortune in the fur trade. He is said to wander the grounds, perhaps still looking to sell his wares. Another famous figure is the Black Ghost, a mysterious form that manifests near the cemetery gates after dark. Then there's the spectre that wanders between the tombstones dressed in 18th century attire, leaving an echo of anguished cries behind. Apparitions aren't the only phenomena occurring at Mount Royal Cemetery. Visitors have also reported unexplained flickering lights among the graves and the sudden onset of inexplicable cold spots. The cemetery grounds, like any such place, have been host to grief, sorrow, anger, and a myriad of other emotions. It's understandable that some of these feelings may be left lingering behind, along with a few wandering souls. A short distance from downtown Quebec City, the towering Montmorency Falls stand 30 meters taller than their more famous Canadian counterpart, Niagara Falls. The water from the Montmorency Falls shoots down the cliffside before blending with the waters of the St. Lawrence River. The site is said to be haunted by the ghost of a woman named Mathilde. It was the winter of 1959, halfway through the 7 Years' War, when Mathilde Robin and Louis Tessier fell in love and made plans to marry before autumn. It was a turbulent time in Quebec's history, and shortly before they were to carry out their plans, Louis was sent to fight in the Battle of Beauport. General Wolfe, who was leading the British forces that would eventually win the battle on the Plains of Abraham, did not find victory at the Battle of Beauport, which took place at the base of the Montmorency waterfall. Inclement weather and the spray from the falls ruined their gunpowder, and the British found themselves needing to retreat after suffering 210 deaths in the battle. The French leader, Montcalm, recorded a smaller number in comparison, losing 60 soldiers in the fight. Unfortunately for Mathilde, one of those soldiers was her fiancé, Louis. Devastated and hopeless, with only days to go before their wedding, Mathilde donned her wedding dress and made her way to the top of the waterfall where she and Louis had stood only days before. Weeping for her lost lover, she threw herself over the edge, her body tumbling into the turbulent waters below before being washed away into the river. Since then, there have been countless claims of a woman in white wailing at the top of the waterfall before her ghostly apparition soars over the cliff's edge. We now move on to Quebec's most famous landmark, the Chateau Frontenac. Standing atop the rocky cliff on which Quebec City is built, Chateau Frontenac is the most photographed hotel in the world. The chateau was built in the 1890s on the site that once housed the Chateau St. Louis, which served as the home of the French governors from 1620 to 1834. Chateau Frontenac was named after the governor Louis de Bouade du Frontenac, who unfortunately never got to see his namesake hotel complete. In a chilling twist to the story, it is rumoured that after Frontenac died, his heart was sent to his wife in a box, though this has never been confirmed. Witnesses claim to see his ghost wander aimlessly around the hotel hallways in search of his wife, and perhaps his heart. But Louis's ghost isn't the only one haunting the Chateau Frontenac. Guests have also reported the apparition of a woman in a white nightgown who watches over them while they sleep, and occasionally even sits on the edge of their beds. Given this, it's hard to imagine a restful night's sleep at this historic hotel. Located in Quebec's Montérégie region is a mountain bathed in an air of mystery. Mount Saint-Hilaire is a known hub for supernatural phenomena and unexplained occurrences. The summit of the mount was once a sacred ritual site for the Algonquin people. Today, it has earned a popular following with groups who subscribe to New Age ideas and conspiracy theories, perhaps in part because of the abundance of unusual minerals found there, including a newly discovered mineral called hilarite, and the effect the mountain has on local magnetism, often causing compasses to lose their bearings. The towns surrounding the mountain have the highest number of recorded UFO sightings in Quebec. In 1981, hundreds of people flocked to the site after a popular ufologist at the time named Richard Glenn claimed he'd received a psychic warning that extraterrestrials would visit the mountain on that specific night. Glenn also claimed that the mountain was an entrance to the hollow Earth, which is based on the concept that our planet is hollow on the inside and is host to inhabitants who live within. UFOs and extraterrestrials aren't the only mysteries Mount Saint-Hilaire is known for. Legends abound, featuring everything from fairies to interconnected lakes. The fairy legend tells of 3 of the mystical beings living in a cave on the mountain for several centuries before abandoning their home and their immortality to marry and carry out the rest of their lives with their human lovers. The cave, which is surrounded by 3 huge rocks, can still be seen from the hiking trail today by looking up to the cliff edge. There is a lake at the base of the mountain that is cause for speculation and lore. Lake Hertel is now a protected part of the mount's nature preserve, but it was once a popular fishing spot where fishermen would pull large sturgeon from its relatively shallow waters, leading to the idea that the lake was bottomless or connected to a series of underground streams that tied to its much larger counterpart, Lake Champlain. The northern cliff face of the mountain is home to a strange horse-shaped ice formation that appears each winter and lingers well into spring. It is believed that the ice is the spirit of a local farmer's horse, warning local farmers not to plant their crops until the strangely shaped ice formation has completely melted. There have also been claims of werewolf sightings in the area over the years. Needless to say, it is highly recommended, given all these occurrences and unexplained phenomena, that hikers remain on the trails at all times and leave the mountain before dark. Convents are a place of mystery to people on the outside. What goes on inside the stone walls leaves a lot of room for imagination to run wild. The former Grey Nuns Convent in Montreal, however, has released some stories of hauntings from its confines. The historic building, also known as the Grey Nuns Mother House, was founded in 1755. The nuns were dedicated to serving the poor and marginalized in times when pandemics and social unrest washed over the city. The warm feeling of safety, compassion, and charity the convent may have held was eventually overshadowed by a much more sinister reputation. Visitors and staff have reported sightings of ghostly nuns walking up and down the hallways, unexplained sounds and disembodied voices echoing through the building, and cold spots suddenly appearing out of nowhere. The most famous ghost at the convent is that of the strict disciplinarian Sister Justine, who apparently died under mysterious circumstances. Her spirit lingers within the convent walls, scrutinizing those who dare to enter her domain. There are other factors contributing to the haunted reputation of the convent. not the least of which is the fact that the basement crypt where the bodies of 232 nuns are kept is still present below the current building, which was purchased and renovated by the local university in 2007. Their remains cannot be moved due to the risk of contamination, given that many of them perished after contracting contagious diseases. Another tragic event that marked the history of the building and its likely cause for the hauntings occurred in 1918, when a fire decimated the top floor of the convent, which at the time was being used as an orphanage. Over 50 children remained trapped on the upper level and perished in the fire. University students report the sound of trampling feet and children crying from the floor above them, as well as the sound of screaming nuns from the floors below. We end this episode with a first-hand account from a listener who worked in a convent in Quebec City in the 1990s. Her experience working the night shift alone as a caregiver to the nuns in the geriatric wing yielded a set of eerie and sometimes downright terrifying experiences. Here is her story. It was the late 1990s. I had Bjork and PJ Harvey on repeat on my Discman as I rode the bus from my apartment in the old town part of Quebec City down to the convent where I worked in one of the first-ring suburbs just past the limits of Lower Town. The convent was established nearly 100 years prior by an order of nuns who were based in Old Quebec. My aunt had been working at the convent as a caretaker for years and got me a job there when I moved to town after high school. I worked the overnight shift from midnight to 8 a.m. The bus would drop me off on the main road across from a large field behind which was a hospital. I would walk across the field, then across the street from the hospital to the convent. Once there, I would ring a bell by the massive front doors and wait for one of the nuns to let me in. I always dreaded the walk from the bus stop to the convent for a myriad of reasons, not the least of which was the time of night, and the fact that on multiple occasions I had overheard orderlies from the nearby asylum telling each other disturbing stories about things that had happened during their shifts. My first few shifts, I was always relieved to be let into the solid wooden doors and stone walls of the convent. I mistakenly thought I was safe once I was inside. I started out working alongside the other nursing assistant who worked the night shift. She showed me the ropes. The most challenging part of the job was staying awake past 4 a.m. Despite doing this job for 2 years, my biological clock never truly adjusted to going to bed when everyone else was getting up for the day. The nuns were in varying states of physical and mental autonomy, ranging from being sound of mind but needing help to get out of bed and into a wheelchair, to being physically mobile but suffering from the ravages of Alzheimer's. My first few shifts alone were uneventful. I don't recall when exactly the first strange occurrence happened, but I know it was a full moon. Over time, I began to detect a pattern. The full moon definitely had an effect on the nuns, whether they had restless sleep or vivid dreams. One night, I heard a nun calling for me from down the hallway. The rooms on the third floor of the convent were equipped with call buttons, similar to what is found in a hospital, but for some reason, she was calling me by shouting. It must have been 2 or 3 a.m., not quite halfway through my shift. I walked into her room, immediately noting that the curtain across from her bed was drawn open. This was strange because we would always close all the curtains when we put the nuns to bed, and this nun was physically unable to get out of her bed. I choked down a growing sense of unease and asked her what was wrong. She told me, quote, "The Holy Father is dead," end quote. By this point in my time at the convent, I had learned to try and keep things calm, simple, and ask follow-up questions that might alleviate confusion. So I asked her, "Really? Who told you that?" Her response sends shivers down my spine to this day. She turned to look at me, her eyes wide, illuminated by the light of the moon coming through the window that should have had a curtain pulled over it, pointed a bony finger toward the corner of the room and said, quote, "The 2 nuns standing over there," end quote. At this point, I wanted to grab my bag, my Discman, my Bjork CD and get out of there. But there was no way I could leave these nuns unattended. They were relying on me for their safety and well-being. I offered to get her a glass of water, closed the curtain and got her settled back into bed. The rest of the night was uneventful, as were my next several shifts. The next time something unusual happened was probably around the same time of night and was a somewhat similar situation, but with a different nun. This time, rather than calling for me, I could hear a nun singing hymns rather loudly for the time of night. Afraid she would wake up the nuns in the surrounding rooms, I went to her and asked what she was doing. She told me, quote, "I was trying to sleep, but the nun in my room keeps singing, so I'm singing along." End quote. In fairness, this nun did suffer from the terrible disease that is Alzheimer's, so some confusion and occasional odd behaviour was to be expected. Still, hearing something like that is disconcerting. I asked her to politely tell the nun in her room that it was the middle of the night and to stop singing. The nun nodded and looked toward the darkness at the foot of her bed and repeated my words out loud. The next thing I know, she's nodding off to sleep as if nothing happened. The call system is set up so the nuns have a handheld button attached to the rails of their hospital-style beds that they can push if they need something. When that button is pushed, it triggers a red light in the office that corresponds to the room number of the nun who pushed the button. The system also emits a beeping sound in the patient's room. The only way to turn off the call button is to go to the room and push an off button located on the wall high above the head of the bed. Several weeks after the singing nun incident, I was alone in the office working in my sketchbook to pass the time when I saw the call light for that same nun light up. I immediately got up and walked to her room. The first thing I noticed when walking through the door was that the alarm above her bed was switched off. This was puzzling because there is no way this nun could reach the switch, and I always worked the night shift alone. I didn't have time to think it through because she immediately turned her head to the side to look at me and in a shaky voice simply said, quote, "I'm scared." End quote. Well, now I was scared too. I stayed with her until she fell asleep, then returned to the office and stayed there with all the lights on until the morning came. One of my tasks at the convent was to walk down the long, wide stairway from the third floor to the basement kitchen to gather breakfast food for the nuns when they woke. I typically would go down there between 4 and 5 a.m. before any of the nuns got up. There was nothing specifically creepy about the stairway or the dining area and kitchen. It was a large, rather open space with beautiful antique woodwork and a graceful tile flooring. But I always felt tremendously uncomfortable there and always dreaded this part of the job. One weekend, I was covering a daytime shift for one of the other nursing assistants. As I was slowly helping one of the nuns take a walk around the convent gardens, she began to tell me stories of her time there, how she became a nun, her family, her childhood, etc. At the very back of the expansive garden was a small stone shrine with religious artifacts. Nearby were 2 small rectangular grave markers that kind of sit flush to the ground. They were too worn and faded to read the inscriptions on them. The nun stopped at the shrine, then glanced down at the gravestones before she proceeded to tell me a story that made my blood run cold. Apparently, many decades prior, 2 nuns were working in the kitchen in the early morning hours when an intruder broke into the convent and attacked them. The nuns did not survive the attack and were buried on site, in the garden. Why did I always feel so uncomfortable in that basement kitchen? Who were the invisible nuns disrupting the nuns in my care in the middle of the night? Who turned off the call button in Sister Cecile's room that night? I will never get answers to my questions. These events happened over 2 decades ago now, and the convent has since been torn down and replaced with condos. The chapel that was attached to it has been converted into a gym for the condo residents. The only thing left from my time there is the garden and the shrine. I wonder sometimes, when the moon is full, If the residents of the condo building find their curtains open to let the moonlight in, and if they hear a woman singing hymns, or the clicking of block heels walking down the hall, or the beeping of a call bell that somehow turned itself off. All sounds that are burned in my memory forever. And that, dear listeners, brings us to the end of this episode. But one thing is certain. Whether or not you believe any of these stories, if you ever find yourself ambling down one of Quebec City's cobblestone streets, having lunch on one of Montreal's many quaint restaurant patios, driving along the banks of the St. Lawrence River, or heading north into the interminable forests of La Belle Province, be sure to keep a watchful eye on what may be lurking in the shadows. Listen closely for distant howling in the night. And whatever you do, don't follow the eerie glow as you're walking in the woods at dusk, because the next person to be haunted abroad could be you.